Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday service for August 3rd of 2025. Today, we're going to look at something that is critical for everyone to look at in life, and it's the distinction between judgment and discernment. Now, these two terms are sometimes confusing and often used interchangeably, but they're actually two very different concepts, and they can lead us to very different outcomes in our life. Now, we live in a time when opinions of everything are just flying all over. There's lines being drawn, and the temptation to divide the world into right and wrong, good and bad, worthy and unworthy is extremely strong right now. Now, spiritual maturity, however, invites us into a higher, more loving way of seeing. And that higher way does not ask us to throw away our ability to see clearly. It asks us to refine it. And that's the essence of discernment: clear, compassionate, spirit guided seeing. So, what is judgment? Now, judgment's often rooted in ego or fear or separation. It labels things, it condemns things, it limits things. And discernment, on the other hand, arises from love, connection, and clarity. It helps us make very wise choices without condemning others or ourselves. Now, we have many, many great spiritual teachers who have had a lot to say about these two concepts. So I'm going to share some of their ideas with you. And the first one, of course, is Charles Fillmore, one of the co-founders of Unity. And he wrote extensively about the 12 powers that are spiritual faculties that every person has within him. And one of those powers is judgment. But he meant something very different from what we often think about today. And he referred to it as wisdom, good judgment. Now, to Fillmore, the power of judgment was not about condemning others or ourselves. It was about the ability to evaluate rightly, guided by spiritual understanding. And in the 12 Powers of Man, he writes, judgment is the mental act of evaluation through comparison or contrast. It is a faculty of the mind that can be exercised in two ways: from sense perception or spiritual understanding. Now, Fillmore made a clear distinction between sense judgment, which can be limited and reactionary, and spiritual judgment, which arises from divine wisdom, which is why he called it wisdom, good judgment. And when we operate from spiritual understanding, our judgments actually become discernments. So in Unity, when we say judge not, we're not saying do not think. We are saying do not condemn, discern through love. And one of Charles's cohorts, actually, who was with him in his studies, was Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of religious science and the author of The Science of Mind. And he also addressed this theme, though in slightly different languaging. Holmes taught that our thoughts create our experience through a universal law, the law of mind. When we engage in judgmental thinking, focusing on lack and fear and criticism, we align ourselves with those patterns and tend to reproduce them in our lives. In The Science of Mind, Holmes states, we are to judge righteously, which means to think rightly. And to Holmes, right judgment was about staying in harmony with spiritual principle. Judgment that is based on appearances, fear, or resentment disturbs the flow of divine intelligence through us. But when we discern with love and spiritual clarity, we stay aligned with truth. And this means, for example, that if someone has treated you unfairly, judgment says that person is bad and deserves to suffer. But discernment might say, I choose to step away from this relationship. Now, the first one binds you to the vibration of the very thing you want to be free of, but the other one actually protects your integrity. And then the next person that I would like to share with you is Edgar Cayce. And Cayce was a psychic and mystic who gave thousands of readings on healing, reincarnation, spiritual growth, all of that. And one of the consistent teachings in his readings was the principle of non-judgment and the emphasis on grace. In one reading, Cayce said, "Judge not that you not be judged. That which you meet, you must receive." Now, for Cayce, judgment was a kind of energetic boomerang. When we judge other harshly, we create a vibrational pattern that returns to us. However, when we practice discernment, making choices aligned with truth while holding others in compassion, we grow spiritually without reinforcing separation. Now, he advised people to look beyond appearances and to remember that every soul is on a journey. That journey may look different from ours, but it is guided by the same divine source. So if a person came to Cayce asking for help with a difficult relationship, he wouldn't say, stay and suffer or cut them off forever. He would often say, in essence, look within. What does love require? What can you learn here? How can you respond without judgment, but with clarity? And of course, if you're in a really negative situation, that doesn't mean stay. It means to discern and to leave, but definitely leave, but leave with clarity and love that you were there for a reason, for a lesson. But definitely leave if it's a really bad situation. Now, discernment, in Cayce's view, is love in action. Now I'm going to jump back in time several centuries and talk about what the Buddha had to say. Now, just for context, the Buddha lived in the 6th or 5th century BC, the time before Jesus was born. He lived in southern Asia and became known as the Enlightened One due to his meditative practices. And some say that in his early childhood, Jesus traveled to this section of the country to study the Buddhist teachings and then brought those into his teachings. Now, the Buddha made a clear distinction between judgment and discernment, though not always using those exact words. In many of the Buddhist texts, the difference shows up in the contrast between moha, which is delusion or ignorance, and panna, wisdom or discernment, between reactive mind states and clear-seeing. In Buddhist thought, judgment often refers to reactive mental states driven by the ego, attachment, aversion, or delusion. And this type of judgment is known as unwholesome because it creates suffering for oneself and others. And what he stated was holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Now, this statement is often attributed to the Buddha, but actually just reflects his teachings. Now, the Buddha states that judgment arises from craving what others have, aversion to people and things. In other words, avoidance, not acceptance of things as they are, and delusion about how things are. Now, these are known as the three poisons and are at the root of what he called the cycle of suffering. When we judge someone or something based on our likes and dislikes, we reinforce these, what he calls poisons, and they cloud our perception. Now, the Buddha stated that judgment is dualistic, good versus bad, us versus them, and that is based on ego and identity, how we identify ourselves, that it's very emotionally reactive and is often harsh or condemning. And of course, that it's rooted in the ignorance of the deeper causes and conditions of behavior. Discernment or wisdom, on the other hand, he states, is one of the 5 spiritual faculties that he taught and is essential for awakening. Now, the Buddha taught that we must develop clear seeing, insight, and understanding to overcome suffering. And this is called vipassana, insight into the true nature of reality. Now, I have shared the vipassana meditations many times over in the past 20 or so years that I've been, speaking at Unity Clear Lake Center. And it's a very, very powerful meditation to release ourselves and eliminate a lot of the energies that are around us and holding us back. But for the Buddha, discernment arises from mindfulness and clear comprehension of what is happening. And it's based in wisdom and compassion. With discernment, we can see things as they are, the impertinence of everything, and how they actually, in the long run, do not bring satisfaction to us. And finally, how we move from the small self being a non-self. Now, the Buddha also stated that discernment also helps us move from being reactive to choosing a skillful action in response to something happening. And finally, it's non-judgmental, it's spacious, and it's peaceful. So, to paraphrase one of his teachings, it says, just as a skilled physician diagnoses disease with care and compassion, so should the wise observe the faults of others, not to blame, but to understand. Now, in The Way of Mastery, which is a book that many of us are reading, The Way of Mastery is a channeled text that's said to come from Yeshua or Jesus. And it talks very profoundly on the difference between discernment and judgment. So in the book, in the part of the book called The Way of the Heart, Yeshua says, discernment is not judgment. It is merely the recognition of what serves the truth within you and what does not. And he goes on to say, when you judge something, you are saying this should not be. So in essence, you're resisting what is. You're actually denying the presence of God because the presence of God is in everything. Now, this is actually a very bold statement. To judge is to resist reality, to oppose the now, and in doing so, to actually separate ourselves from the divine presence. Discernment, however, does not resist anything, no matter what is going on. It observes, it honors, and it chooses. Now, later, Joshua says the spiritually mature person learns to look upon everything with what he calls the Christ vision, which sees the innocence behind every action and the divine essence in every soul. So, for example, suppose you witness someone behaving unethically. Judgment would say, that person is a bad person. Discernment says, the behavior is out of alignment with truth. I choose not to support it, but I hold that soul in compassion, knowing that they are more than what they are expressing in this moment. Joshua's teaching is clear. Discernment allows us to make choices in alignment with love. Judgment keeps us chained to fear. Of course, all the above comes from the book, The Way of Mastery. So let's look at what Jesus said as reported in the Bible. So in many places, the Bible warns against condemning others, what we might call judgment in the negative sense. So in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, and this is Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount, judge not that you not be judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. And this is one of the more well-known verses about judgment. And here, Jesus is clearly warning against the kind of judgment that condemns or evaluates one above others. It's not a call to ignore wrongdoing or never assess behavior. It's about not playing the role of moral superior or divine judge. And in Romans chapter 14, verses 10 to 13, you then, why do you judge your brother or sister? Why do you treat them with contempt? For we all stand before God's judgment seat. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. And again, Paul discourages people from sitting in moral superiority instead of focusing on others' behavior with criticism. Paul encourages every person to examine their own life. Now, discernment, on the other hand, is presented as a gift and a necessary spiritual practice. It's the ability to perceive rightly, especially between truth and deception, good and evil. And in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 9, which is Solomon's prayer, give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. Now, Solomon's famous prayer shows that discernment is a divine gift connected to wisdom and leadership. And in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14, but solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Here, discernment is described as a skill that matures over time through spiritual practice. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, the person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but the spiritual person makes judgments about all things, but is not subject to merely human judgments. And Paul is speaking here about spiritual discernment, a way of judging that is guided by the Holy Spirit rather than human bias. The Greek word that is used originally in the Bible is anakarino, meaning to examine or investigate, not to condemn. And of course, one of the most powerful illustrations is the story of the woman caught in adultery. And this comes from John chapter 8, verses 4 to 11. Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such woman. Now, what do you say? And they were using this question as a trap to have a basis for accusing him. But all Jesus did was bend down and he started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus stood up and said to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and from now on sin no more. So Jesus does not deny that her behavior was misaligned. He discerns it, but he does not condemn her. He offers her grace and truth together. So, what does all this look like in our daily life? Let's look at a few examples. At work, you notice a coworker who constantly gossips. Judgment, they're toxic, I can't stand them. Discernment, this behavior doesn't support my peace. I'll avoid engaging in gossip and limit my interactions while holding them in love. In your inner life, you make a mistake, judgment. I always mess up. I'm a failure. Discernment. That was not my highest choice. I see the lesson and commit to choosing differently next time. Now, how about politics and social media? Let's say someone expresses a view that offends you. Judgment. They're ignorant and hateful. Discernment. That view doesn't align with my values. I can respond with clarity or choose silence, but I won't dehumanize them. They also are a child of God. See, discernment keeps your heart open while maintaining your spiritual integrity. Judgment slams the door shut on others and on your own self. So, how do we cultivate discernment? First of all, pause and breathe. You know, when you feel the fire of judgment rise, pause, take a breath, and this interrupts the ego's momentum. Ask for a vision. Just silently ask, Holy Spirit, show me the truth here. How would love see this? And what we're doing is we're separating the behavior from the person doing the behavior. Every person is more than their worst moment. See the behavior for what it is without collapsing the person into it. And choose from integrity. Discernment often means making tough choices. It may involve setting boundaries, saying no, or walking away. But do it with love, not bitterness. Finally, forgive. Judgment clings, discernment releases. And forgiveness is the bridge between seeing clearly and loving fully. So, in conclusion, take the path of the heart. Judgment divides, discernment unites. Judgment says this is wrong and I must reject it. Discernment says this does not serve the truth and I choose another path. So all of our great teachers, Fillmore Holmes, Casey, Buddha, Jesus, and so many, many more, invite us to this higher ground, a place where we can see clearly without closing our hearts, where we can be honest without being cruel, where we can choose with wisdom and still love without condition. And this is the call of the awakened soul. And so, as we continue our journey here on this earth plane, let's ask ourselves not just, am I right, but am I aligned with love? So I invite you right now to close your eyes and place a hand over your heart and repeat silently after me. May I see with the eyes of Christ discern with the heart of spirit, and walk gently in the world, bearing truth without judgment and love without limit. So thank you to everyone who joined with us today. Many, many blessings to each and every one of you. Have a beautiful week and God bless.